you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in adjournment proceedings this evening to revisit a question that I put to the government on November 2nd of last year. At that point, Mr. Speaker, we were a month away from the opening of the 24th Conference of the Parties of the Framework Convention on Climate Change. I had hoped at that point, Mr. Speaker, that the very serious warnings of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change and the 1.5-degree special report would result in the Government of Canada at long last yanking the Harper target under which this government still develops its inadequate planning for climate disaster, a target that is the weakest in the industrialized world. And I hoped that by looking at the IPCC report and its call for urgent action, its clear warning call that if we fail to hold global average temperature to 1.5 degrees Celsius global average temperature increase, if we failed to do that, we could be on the trajectory, the risks were high, of a trajectory towards runaway, unstoppable, irreversible climate disaster, a catastrophic impact that could, well, the end of civilization isn't even the worst. Extinction for humanity and other species on this planet with us is where we are headed if we go above 2 degrees to 3 degrees, 4 degrees, and so on. Now, we really don't have time to continue to talk about this, but just to finish the point about the IPCC report and what happened at COP24, I was horrified to attend COP24, where no country except Fiji and the Marshall Islands improved their targets. Young Greta Thunberg from Stockholm was there, and she looked at the delegates and asked if they had any intention of ever acting. And then she actually said, "I don't expect you to act. You've disappointed us for so many years." She said, "It's the children that are leading." And to quote her exactly, she said, "You don't even have the courage to tell it like it is, even that burden you leave to your children." So here we are months later, no change to Canada's climate target. We're still holding to Harper's target to extinction. And young Greta Thunberg, on the other hand, has mobilized, and on this Friday, March 15th, 2019, over 1.5 million children marched to demand that governments finally do what they've been procrastinating, politicians kicking it down the alley to the next government, maybe hoping someone else can pick up the challenge, or that no one will remember that they're responsible for doing nothing when the clarion call was clear. So we don't have, as some would take it, 12 years. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change said we have to reduce by 45% below 2010 levels and do it by 2030. That doesn't mean we have 12 years. We only have now. And take it, we don't have years, let's take it in months. When the panel report came down on October 8th of last year, we had 144 months. We now have 139 months. The clock is ticking, and without action, we in this place, as legislators all around the world, we will be culpable for bequeathing to our children an unlivable world. We must set legislated targets to cut fossil fuel use such that it's cut in half before the end of the next decade, that it's completely eliminated by the year 2050. And at the same time, we must ramp up efforts at adaptation. We must plant trees. We must plant gardens. We must do everything in our grasp, anything that's beyond our grasp, anything in our reach, because we, this generation, must not give up on our children.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And as always, I'd like to thank the member for Saanich Gulf Islands for her passion for defending our environment. The fact is that we all see the very real impacts of climate change across our country. There's floods in New Brunswick, droughts and forest fires in the west, a melting Arctic, rising sea levels on the east coast where I'm from. And we understand the need to take action to ensure a sustainable planet for future generations. We understand the importance of limiting the temperature increase globally to 1.5 degrees, as examined in the IPCC report. That's why Canada supported this goal during the Paris Agreement negotiations and why we were one of the first countries to ratify the agreement. At the same time, the government was working to establish the Pan-Canadian framework on clean growth and climate change to reduce our emissions in line with our Paris commitments. This was a landmark achievement, and the framework is the first climate change plan in Canada's history to include joint and individual commitments by provinces and territories to have been developed in consultation with Indigenous peoples in Canada. This plan will grow the economy while reducing pollution at the same time and building resilience to a changing climate. We know that pollution isn't free, and one aspect of our plan is to put a price on pollution. It's a central feature to it, but it's not the only thing that we're doing. This is going to be the most efficient way to reduce GHG emissions while maintaining a strong and growing economy. Putting a price on pollution in all jurisdictions in Canada in 2019, either through provincial and territorial systems adapted to their specific circumstances or through the application of the federal carbon pricing pollution system. We're making significant progress on implementing our plan, and it's starting to work. Our most recent emissions projections, published in December of last year, show a widespread decline in projected emissions across all economic sectors, reflecting the breadth and depth of the pan-Canadian framework. When our plan is fully implemented, it's going to position Canada to meet the 2030 goal and to continue, importantly, to continue to achieve carbon pollution reductions well beyond 2030. I agree with the member that the time to act is now. We have to take this threat seriously. I note, Mr. Speaker, that this strategy, which focuses on meeting climate change objectives and enabling growth in the longer term, describes various pathways consistent with limiting global temperature increase to as little as possible by 2050 as called for in the Paris Agreement. The agreement calls for countries to routinely update its ambitions. We are working to ensure that we're doing all that we can as fast as we reasonably can to help prevent the dire circumstances that the member outlined in her question. The fact is, our government is committed to working with all partners to tackle climate change. We understand the huge economic opportunity of clean growth, and we want to leave a cleaner and healthier planet for our kids. And I tell you, Mr. Speaker, as someone who grew up in a different generation than many members of this House, it kills me when people throw up their hands and say that we can't do more, we can't do it. Mr. Speaker, we don't have an option. We are moving forward with a plan that's going to have a meaningful emissions reduction in our country. It's the right thing to do, and it's the smart thing to do.
The honourable member for Saanich Gulf Islands.
It's neither right nor smart to deal with a climate emergency as though incremental half measures will cut it. Incremental half measures may be better than parties that want to do nothing. But when incremental half measures have the same impact as doing nothing, in other words, setting us on a trajectory above 2 degrees, above 3 degrees, above 4 degrees, if every country on Earth had Canada's target, and this has been studied by the scientific community, the world would go to 5.1 degrees Celsius. We are not leaders now. We could be. We are laggards now. And it's time for this government, with people of goodwill and good minds, like the Honourable Parliamentary Secretary, who understands this issue well enough to know that half measures are just about as good as no measures. Incrementalism, procrastination, that era is over. What matters now is that we act and reduce emissions and end fossil fuel dependency.
Parliamentary Secretary.
I expect, Mr. Speaker, with the limited time, the honourable member and I may have to have follow-up conversations, as we often do. The fact is, we're starting to make very serious progress in implementing our plan. To date, this includes the adoption of new legislation that provides the authority to implement the federal carbon pricing pollution system. It involves extensive engagement on the development of this federal system and confirmation of where it will apply and where the proceeds are going to be directed. But that's not the only thing we're doing. We've adopted new regulations to reduce methane emissions by 45%, and I benefit from the expertise of folks like Dr. David Risk at St. FX University to fully understand these myself. We're accelerating the phase-out of coal-fired electricity by more than 30 years, and we're looking to reduce emissions from heavy-duty vehicles. We've established a low-carbon economy fund. We're seeking to have, by 2030, 90% of our electricity in Canada generated from clean resources. Mr. Speaker, the fact is, we know that this threat is serious. We are taking actions as quickly as we can to reduce emissions in an effective way, and we can get there together. Thank you.